Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're well on this amazing, mental, terrific Tuesday. Yes, that's right. It's Tuesday, and we're going to get straight into the meat and potatoes as we've got some stuff to go over today. We're sticking with the Idaho 4 case today. Even though I will say, for those of you who have been following the Liam Payne situation, they have just unveiled a beautiful, beautiful memorial over in Argentina, and I will certainly be visiting that when I head over there later on this year or January next year. The plan is December, but what with everything else, I'm not 100% sure, but that'll either be December or January, but we will get to see that. But anyway, what are we talking about in this video? Being a content creator covering the Idaho 4 case is mental. It's absolutely nuts. Some of the stuff that you have to go through, the case itself, and the craziness of the court documents and the things we see and the things that shock us. Like just recently, we've had this call that's been released to the public, and I'm caught with so many different thoughts and feelings around this call. I've even considered, was this call spliced? Was this a proportion of this call actually from the time that we believe the crime took place? Because there's elements of that call that makes more sense if you move the time, because I can't work out some of the behaviour and some of the things that are said, bearing in mind that we're 8 hours down the line. But anyway, that's by and by, and that's things that we can talk about tonight in the live as we cover Fact versus Fiction Part 2. If you didn't catch Part 1, that was on Sunday night, so go and check that out if you haven't. But tonight will be Part 2, where we separate fact from fiction on both sides of the argument, both the guilters and the pro-burgers. But what I want to do in this video is bring your attention to a comment that I read, because again, not only is it the content itself and the things that you see and get involved in, but it's also the community and the feeling of the community. And do you know what? There's some people who are horrible in the comments, absolutely horrible, and they're horrible because they have a certain way of thinking. And I call them horrible because you don't have to be a prick just because you think differently than the person next to you. Everybody has a right to think and feel a certain way, and everybody interprets things differently, and certain things can influence their choices, and you don't know what's going on in someone's life or what's happened to someone in their life for them to consider what they're considering. So who are you to police their thoughts? And over on this channel, I do try and be as balanced in the fact that I consistently say Brian Kohberger could be guilty of this crime. The issue that I have is that I haven't seen enough evidence for me to conclude that that's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I just can't. And there are elements to it, if you read into it, that would suggest that even law enforcement themselves, they struggle to place him at the scene of the crime, and there are elements to it that they have had to kind of squeeze and manipulate and push out in a certain way to cause a false feeling towards Brian Kohberger. And I'm thinking, well, if he did the crime, you wouldn't need to do that. You wouldn't need to have made us think and feel early on that he was a stalker, when in fact you knew that he wasn't. And it's little things like that. And we can rarely go into the weeds on some things that have been released that just don't look good. It don't look good for Moscow Police Department. It truly doesn't. It looks like Moscow Police Department, they fucked up. But anyway, amidst everything, a comment come into my lap like a I don't know, like a gift from God. And this was over on the Lawyer channel when he was going over the audio. And I'm not going to get into what his comments about the call was, because again, he sees it through different eyes. And I feel that sometimes Lawyer, even though he's a gorgeous, gorgeous hunk of a man, that call, it would have been better if he'd have concentrated on the call and what was going on in the call, rather than trying to work the case and talk. They're two separate entities. And I think if you look at that call as a standalone thing, a standalone entity, you see it differently. But anyway, I digress. So this is the comment. I want to go through this comment because this is one of the best comments that I've seen within a community that follows this case, and it represents what I feel everybody should take into consideration and truly think. Whether you're a pro burger or you're an anti burger, this comment sums it up. So let's look at it. So it's from iChicks86 or LChicks86, and it says, "Lest we forget, the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt is on the prosecution, not the defense. And here we have a case with the blood from 2 other identified males that wasn't run through CODIS, and conflicting reasoning by the prosecution and its agents as to why it wasn't." So we've heard that, that they had these samples, and on one hand they're saying, well, we couldn't put it through CODIS because we'd already entered some details into CODIS, and there's like this tiering system, and it would have impacted that. And I'm thinking to myself, right, so if there was any other cases that happened, just say another case cropped up, so you wouldn't have been able to put DNA into the system. That would have locked the system out of being used. But then we hear later on that they didn't put them through any further it's bizarre. The Payne himself turns around and says, "No, we didn't test them because FBI said there's Koberger. Check him out. You need to check him out." But stick a pin in it. So 3 unidentified DNA profiles under Maddie's fingernails, which the state said was inconclusive, but a subsequent lab hired by the defense excluded BK. So even in that small proportion of this case, and bearing in mind that the linchpin of this entire situation is a knife sheath, just in that small segment alone, with Maddie and what they found, it was as if the state wanted to form doubt around it and put this picture that, well, it could have been Brian Koberger, when it took independent testing by the defense to rule him out, and then the prosecution then accepts that, and they're like, yeah. And you hear, and we'll carry on, because I'll come back to that. The state basing BK's location on cell tower pings, which are unreliable given that he lives less than 10 miles from the location of the crimes. Brian Koberger could be sitting in his bed playing with his meat and veg and pinging on a tower that could be, you could say that he was in Moscow, Idaho, because of the range of the towers. And that's why the additional data is so important. What Cy Ray talks about, what the prosecution wants you to believe doesn't exist, when it does exist. So just bear that in mind. So we then have the defense claiming they have the actual GPS data showing BK was not in the area the night of the crimes. Now, this here I'm sort of on the fence with. They're alluding to that they can prove that he wasn't by adding the timing advance reports, which is definitely going to work in their favour if they obtain the time advance reports. And again, I'd say keep your eyes peeled. The area of the night of the crime. So it says no murder weapon. We don't have a murder weapon at all. And if you want to look further into the murder weapon situation, you could say that there's been occasions where it would be suggested that there was more than one. Kathy Mabber and her explanations, Steve Gonsalves and his explanations. Kathy Mabber, in fact, would move the entire timeline to a different time. No evidence of any connection to the victims whatsoever. There isn't. There is no stalking. There is no messaging on social media. There is no identification card, no ID card found on Brian Koberger that belongs to any of the victims. There is no concrete evidence via phone pings because the data is missing. So they are just considering that he could have, it's likely that if he did this crime, this is the route he took, which they must do that because they're saying he did it. So they're saying if he did it and he was in his apartment at this time and the crime happened at this time, we deduce that he took this route. But you've got a specialist in the field, Cy Ray, saying, but you don't have the evidence of that. You are speculating, but you could obtain evidence that would support that, but you're not doing it. And again, they want you to believe it doesn't exist. Why is that? So, next it says no DNA from the victims in BK's car, office, at work, apartment, or parents' house. There has been no public notification that would lead you to believe that there was anything found. No DNA. Bearing in mind that he's gone into a house that it don't look like it was the cleanest place in the world. And this was a fucking party house. This was a party house. So imagine how many people are in this house, right? And what nobody has talked about at this point is that they haven't, when they tested Brian Koberger's car, they found no DNA that was connected to that property so far. It would appear. Now, he could have touched something that had someone else's DNA, like some friend. Again, transfer DNA, touch DNA, which is the linchpin of this entire case, is everywhere. Is absolutely everywhere. So if someone's walked into this house and touched multiple things, there are so many situations where they could take a microscopic something from that house into their car. They're walking on the floor in the carpet. They're walking through a mess that they have created, and then they go and get in the car. What? There's nothing? There's not one single solitary dog hair. Not one single solitary skin cell. There was nothing. And no evidence that it was removed. And it says, surviving roommates who called friends over before calling law enforcement, thus contaminating the crime scene. We do have a contaminated crime scene. And you only have to look back to, like, John Benet Ramsey case, for instance, and look at the catastrophic effect that things like that can have on a case. No motive. We don't have a motive. And don't get me wrong, some people will argue and say we don't really need a motive, but you do really. You do really. If you've got a circumstantial case, then at the very fucking least, you've got to have a motive of some description. And that's why you see the prosecution very likely digging into the history of Brian Koberger and his growing up and his childhood and bringing some really obscure elements into it because they seem to be really struggling to find anything. And if there was something, we would know it by now. Someone would have come forward and said something. And what have we really seen? Have we seen anything said by anybody? Some leaked information? Because you can bet your bollocks to a barn dance that people have been all over this like flies on shit trying to get some dirt on Brian Koberger. And it seemingly doesn't exist. Not beyond what you would expect normality of a lad going to a bar and pissing some female off because he had a few drinks and made a pass that he don't really like. Or a Tinder date where they're calling him a weirdo. What? Because he was a bit strange. Because we now find out that the guy very likely is ASD, which is going to make him behave certain ways. It's funny how that person from Tinder never mentioned that. Did he put that on his dating profile or did he leave it off of his dating profile? So again, what you're hearing from her describing Brian Koberger is her describing someone who she was not aware of his ASD and was just speaking on that. But she had nothing really bad to say. She just found him a little odd, which you're going to if you don't understand that he has these difficulties. So again, nothing. There is nothing. No bad things. Nothing. And again, this is where we're going to switch up a little bit in a second in this comment when the penny's going to drop and you're going to say, okay, who are the dodgy people around this crime? So blurry photos of a nondescript white car, the model year, which law enforcement couldn't even accurately initially identify after several attempts with no visible license plate or driver identification. We have a car that's a white Hyundai Elantra, they believe. And you're relying on someone who's a human, who, yeah, they're very specialised at the job, but they did seem to struggle at first, but they did change it because they then realised that there isn't massive differences aesthetically in the years of the white Hyundai Elantra. But there's a white Hyundai Elantra. But there is another white Hyundai Elantra that's on the peripheral of this case, the smashed up one. And some people say it's cleared. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Who fucking knows? But there's a smashed up white Hyundai Elantra. And there's other cars around here. How do we know that the white Hyundai Elantra is Brian Koberger's? I believe it was Michael Adagio on one of his videos that he clearly shows that there's a white Hyundai Elantra that fucking lives around this area. Literally lives around the corner. So who knows? Genetic genealogy procedures performed, yet the agencies involved didn't save their work as required by law. So again, there's no work. There's nothing to show how they got it. They've just got a conclusion. They've got an answer. And that answer came in the form of a name from FBI going, that's the name you want. Look at that name. The FBI tells Othram to cease work, to cease their work, stop it. And then FBI goes back to MPD and gives them Brian Kohberger's name. So you've got incomplete work from Othram, and then you've got the FBI giving MPD a name, but offering no evidence to show how they got to that name. While now, later on down the line, we find out that Brian Kohberger was very likely being considered for the Dana Smithers case, which I've said time and time again. I believe that Brian Kohberger was very likely on their radar. They believed that it was possible that Brian Kohberger was involved in this crime. I think that MPD then, they knew that Brian Kohberger wasn't in the area. They couldn't prove it, but they latched onto the Brian Kohberger situation because the FBI had given them the details. And I reckon somewhere along the line, the FBI then realises that the MPD have got shit wrong, and they start to pull away and say, nah, you can sort this out now. This is now your mess. This is now your mess. But that's me speculating. That's not fact. That's just me speculating and spitballing, right? So the crime scene was demolished before a trial date was set. And let's not forget that the state scheduled the house to be cleaned before the suspect had even been arrested in the case. It was only after Ann Taylor was appointed that she filed a motion to halt the scheduled cleaning so she could have an opportunity to view the crime scene in person. So again, this entire situation, right from the very fucking start, was about concealment. You've got DNA found at the site, found at the scene of the crime. What's happening? Concealed. You've got DNA found under Madison Mogan's nails. How do they deal with that? Tried to make you think that it's possibly Brian Kohberger. Later on, determined it's not through independent testing. Again, then what's happened? The rest is shielded. Then what happens? You've got this situation. It seems that they wanted to tear the fucking house down. And why do they want to tear the house down? Why would you ever want to tear the house down? Why did they want to clean it before the defence had even got a chance to look at it? It just doesn't make sense. This is about concealment. Maddie's stepmom and Xana's mum were both arrested for serious drug charges and took plea deals to receive reduced sentences in the 2 months preceding the murders. An interesting fact most people overlook, especially considering that out of the 4 victims, Maddie and Xana were the only 2 who were actually supposed to be there that night. Which again is a fact. Kaylee wasn't supposed to be there. Kaylee weren't supposed to be there, was she? And Ethan, he wasn't either. He didn't live there. He was just staying there with Xana. So out of the 2 victims, the only 2 that were supposed to be there were the 2 people who do, on the peripheral of things, they have D-Rug connections. And again, I'm just saying it because it's true. It might piss people off, and people are going to say, no, it's got nothing to do. But it's about taking all of the information in. You can't look at a traffic stop of Brian Kohberger's and use that to leverage your opinion, but you're unwilling to look at the connections to more nefarious acts because it doesn't suit your opinion. So then we go to the next bit here. Look, I'm not convinced that BK is innocent, and that's the important thing here. This person is not a pro-burger. They're saying, look, I'm not convinced that BK is innocent, because that conclusion would be inappropriate to assume, given that we have not seen all the evidence. I do feel that if he is guilty, he didn't act alone. And what have I said consistently? That this crime reeks of more than one perpetrator, more than one person involved, more than one person done it. To believe that one person entered this home and did this crime, to me, just doesn't fit. It doesn't sit right. However, by all accounts, reasonable doubt has already been well established in this case due to the issues stated above. Even if he is convicted, the case will likely be reversed on appeal. which I believe that a lot of what Ann Taylor is doing is bearing that in mind. I think that she is, to some degree, playing an appeal game. She knows that there's a chance that we're going to hit a jury that could potentially be biased, and Brian's probably best hope is to go through the appeals situation, and she can raise multiple issues. But it says true justice is exploring all available evidence to the fullest extent possible and ensuring that all responsible parties are held accountable. Not simply hoping a particular person is convicted just because people want or need someone to blame. And I couldn't have put it better myself. Please tell me what you think. From all of the comments and things that you've seen, whatever side of the fence, whatever side of the argument you're on, surely nobody following this crime can disagree with anything that is put in there. Nothing. There is nothing that you should be disregarding. True justice is about bringing justice to the people who deserve it. The people who did this crime, the person or people who took the lives of these 4 young adults. It isn't about just ticking a box. I believe Kohberger did it. The group over there, who are the cool group, they believe Brian Kohberger did it. So I'm going to run along, join them, and together we're going to get our pitchforks out. Do you know what I mean? Look at the evidence. Look at what you're being shown and learn to decipher between fact and fiction and fact and feelings. And if you're interested in talking more about this, join us tonight live 10:45 p.m. UK time, which is 5:45 p.m. Eastern time, I believe. But anyway, till then, love you all. Mwah.